Okay, so here's a little diagram which I hope will show how people work, basically. And so these are external objects. The objects act on the will, which is this little circle, and the larger circle around it is the cognitive faculty. And so the objects act on the will through the cognitive faculty, and then from the will and through the cognitive faculty, they express themselves as mental or physical volitions. Now, volition, if it is physical, it's already mental, but it can be mental without being a physical. So I can think about doing something, but I don't necessarily do it. But if I do it, that means I necessarily thought about it. And so here we have motives and ideas. And so objects, with humans, they cause ideas that may or may not become motives. I might see that eraser over there, but I might think, I'm gonna take it. I will not take this eraser right now, I will take it after a year. But with animals, as soon as they see something, an idea immediately becomes a motive. And whatever becomes a motive expresses itself as a volition. Now, how do we distinguish motives from ideas? Because they're within the cognitive faculty. Well, through volitions. If a volition took place, that means that idea has become a motive. If the volition did not take place, that means the idea has remained as an idea. And so humans, we can gather these ideas, and then the motives play around in our cognitive faculty, and they are being presented to our will in a much more slower way. And it's in a slower way. It takes more time for us to decide not for us to decide that act itself is already a play of motives. So the decision process is a play of motives. And then one of them will be expressed as a volition. But we know that only a posteriori. We only know what motive triggered this or that volition after the volition took place, even with ourselves. And thus the diagram over there, which shows that the cause and effect increases from the simpler objects to the more complicated objects, but with humans it just shoots off because the difference between the stimulus and the volition becomes completely indeterminate, as I've already said. And so now, the thing is, when we consider ourselves or anything else through this a priori cause and effect, which we cannot not do, that's the only way we do perceive objects. The thing is that every time there is a motive, the volition necessarily follows. Now, it may take a lot of time in case of humans, or it might be more immediate with animals, or it might just be a constant transformation of cause into effect, like with plants. Nevertheless, if there is a cause, if there is anything that happened, if there is an effect, if there is anything that happened, it has an underlying cause. And if anything has an underlying cause, that means it is determined by that cause. So any effect is determined by its cause. And this raises the question of necessity. Because if we're saying something is caused by something else, that means that the effect necessarily followed. That is the meaning of cause and effect. And so even with this obscure, strange picture when we have all these motives battling against each other, one of them will necessarily win. One of them will necessarily take place. And thus the volition. So if a volition took place, there was necessarily an underlying motive, which Schopenhauer refers to as the sufficient ground. So my choices are, when I'm considering a fact, an event, either to refrain from understanding it and consider it as a miracle, and just say that, well, it happened, I don't know why it happened, it just happened. Or I can ask, okay, why did this happen? And as soon as I say that, I'm already searching for an underlying cause. If I find the underlying cause, the effect is completely determined. If I don't find it, I never understood it. And so now, we want to apply this cause and effect form to the will, the human will. But again, the problem is it seems the problem is very self-evident, because if I'm considering the will, I'm saying, okay, what causes certain motives to become certain volitions through the medium of the will? In other words, what volitions were caused by what motives? And so just by trying to perceive it, just by trying to understand what's going on, I'm imposing necessity. Now, as I said, the process of understanding is really a play of accident and necessity. Because everything I understand their underlying causes, and therefore whatever happens is necessitated by those causes. And everything I am to understand, everything that I am going to understand, as far as I don't understand it, is an accident. Because I have not tried to understand it, I have not imposed the a priori form of cause and effect on it, and therefore it is an accident, therefore I don't understand it. But as soon as I try to understand it, as soon as I try to grasp what its cause is, I'm putting it into a sequence of determined events. And so Schopenhauer says that not only are accidents, well, not only do they happen, but they are inseparable from our everyday experience. Because in my immediate spatiotemporal surroundings, a lot of things happen simultaneously. And when these things happen simultaneously, I say, okay, well, some of the things I don't care why they happened. And then I say, okay, why did that thing happen? And then when I consider that thing, I'm tracing it back to its causes, to its cause and effect chain. But then there's also the other thing that happens simultaneously. And then until I consider that thing through its own chain of cause and effect, it is an accident. But in my spatiotemporal surroundings, there's always a lot of things happening. And so as soon as I make a choice to understand one thing, I'm saying, okay, I don't want to understand all those other things. Because I'm making a choice. I'm distinguishing something that I'm going to investigate. And so I'm saying, okay, all those things are accidents as far as this moment is considered, and I'm going to trace this event to its cause and effect chain. And so the process of understanding or experiencing the world is this interplay of necessity and accident. And so the question is, the will, which we don't know what it is, but we can consider it under the form of cause and effect. But we can consider it, the will, as an interplay of input and output, of it being affected by objects and it affecting the objects. And so through these empirical observations, let's say this is a person, and then I say, okay, this person acts like this in this situation, and its will is affected by this object in this situation. We always act towards objects. And then I say, okay, in a different situation, there's this object that acts on them, and then this volition takes place. And then there's this object in this situation, and that volition takes place. And so and then I do this for as many situations as I can. And I say, okay, this person, I've seen this person act in almost all possible situations. And in every possible situation, there's a certain pattern of his actions. In every situation, his volitions become determined by certain types of objects. And from that, I infer about his will, but I never completely understand it, because in any given situation, he might act differently in a way that I've never seen before. So really, it's an inductive process. It's a statistical process. So I'm saying in this situation, he does this, and that he does that. And then my overall understanding of his will or his character, Schopenhauer says the character and the will are the same, is really the process of trying to attain his character infinitely. It never stops. Because you cannot really observe in principle all the possible situations and all the possible objects and all the motives that this person will be influenced by. And so you have an overall grasp of a person's character according to all the empirical evidence you have of how he acts in certain situations. And by observing every action, every volition, and deducing every motive of that volition, you get closer and closer to understanding his will, his character, but you never really get there. And so Schopenhauer says, and that's the basis of psychoanalysis. And then Schopenhauer says that in order to understand our own will and our own selves, we must stop thinking of ourselves as responsible agents, and must understand this determinate chain of objects, motives, ideas, and volitions, and then observe ourselves empirically. And so we come to understand our character through our actions, through what we do. And the more situations we expose ourselves to, the closer we get, just like with other people, the closer we get to understanding our character. And that process is also infinite. And so this is his own take on the Platonic know thyself doctrine. And so then the problem is, okay, if the will is always within this determinate chain of causes, motives, and volitions, then where is our freedom? And this is where it gets even more complicated. Because he says, well, okay, what are we doing when we're trying to understand the will? Just like with all other objects, we try to put it under a determinate cause and effect chain. But we can never really fully do that, because we can always imagine a new situation where the possessor of this will acts differently. And therefore, we can never really fully put it under the cause and effect chain. But we keep getting closer and closer to it. So we get closer and closer to the fatalistic picture of our freedom of the will, but we always fail to get there. So he says, in this attempt to render our will basically unfree, and in observing that we fail to do so, therein lies our freedom. And that's what he called transcendental freedom. So it's transcendental because there's something there. You want to understand it. You get closer and closer and closer to understanding it. And understanding it is making it unfree. But you fail to do so. And in that eternal process lies the freedom. That's it.